नहीं? So let's start today's class. In last class, we have discussed about introduction to DBMS. We defined DBMS. What are the application area of DBMS? And we have discussed about uh, file system over DBMS. What are the drawbacks of file system and how the overcome by DBMS? Abstraction we have discussed. Three level of abstraction: physical, logical, and view level abstraction. Instance we have discussed. Schemas we have discussed. Data models we have four data models. Data models nothing but a structure of our data. Then we have discussed relational data model, ER data model, and data definition language, D, and data manipulation language we have discussed. So let's start today's class. In today's class, let me share the screen. Okay. My computer screen is visible to all of you. आप लोगों को मेरे कंप्यूटर की स्क्रीन दिख रही है? Okay. So in today's class, we will discuss about the conceptual design using ER model. ER instant entity relationship data model. Okay. ER model is basically a conceptual model for database design. So let's start with how we can process a database design. Means actually how a database actually process. Okay. So before we process or design any database, first we have to identify the UOD or the organization for which we are going to design a database. This is the first step. मीन्स जब भी आप कोई डेटाबेस किसी भी इंटरप्राइज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के लिए डिजाइन करेंगे, सबसे पहले हम क्या करेंगे, उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे किसके लिए हम डिजाइन कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. फर्स्ट स्टेप है फाइंड योर यूओडी, यूनिवर्स ऑफ डिस्कोर्स, फॉर विच यू आर गोइंग टू डिजाइन अ database. Always your database will be embedded with some enterprise. Okay. It may be a bank, it may be university, it may be any library or companies, anything. Okay. First identify your UOD, then collect requirements. What are the requirements of that UOD? Okay. So in the collection requirement, suppose you are going to build a database for the bank. So first you visit the bank, find their requirements, find their operations, how they conduct their operations, what are the data required for that operations. Okay. So first you collecting all the requirements. After collecting the requirements, segregate that requirement based on data and application. Means what data means what are the data required for that bank. Okay. फर्स्ट आप आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे उस बैंक को कौन कौन से डेटा रिक्वायर्ड है, बैंक को क्या क्या डेटा चाहिए, वो आप आइडेंटिफाई कीजिए उसके रिक्वायरमेंट से. देन आप आइडेंटिफाई कीजिए उसके क्या क्या ऑपरेशन हैं, बैंक कौन कौन से ऑपरेशन परफॉर्म करती है, जैसे ओपनिंग एन अकाउंट, ट्रांसफर फंड फ्रॉम वन अकाउंट टू अनदर अकाउंट, एंड एन नंबर ऑपरेशन जो भी बैंक परफॉर्म करती है वो आइडेंटिफाई किया आपने. वो उन ऑपरेशन परफॉर्म करने के लिए क्या क्या डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट है वो आप लोग आइडेंटिफाई करेंगे. देन जो डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट है उसके अकॉर्डिंग हम डेटाबेस क्रिएट करेंगे. तो आप अल्टीमेटली आपके टू स्ट्रीम्स हो जाएंगी, डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट और डेटाबेस रिक्वायरमेंट. सेकंड फंक्शनल रिक्वायरमेंट्स, उसकी क्या क्या फंक्शनल रिक्वायर्ड पर्टिकुलर इंटरप्राइज के लिए। ओके, फंक्शनल रिक्वायरमेंट्स आप बनाएंगे एप्लीकेशंस एंड डेटाबेस, डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट्स बनाएंगे आप कंपनी का डेटाबेस। ओके, सो टू पैरेलल प्रोसेस हम साथ में लेके चलेंगे। डेटाबेस रिक्वायरमेंट्स, जो डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट है उसको फर्स्ट उसका क्रिएट करेंगे कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइन। मीन्स जब भी हम डेटाबेस क्रिएट करेंगे उससे पहले हम एक डिजाइन करते हैं कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइन उस डेटाबेस का। जैसे हम कोई भी एक्चुअल कोई भी एक्चुअल चीज हम जब बिल्ड करते हैं या इम्प्लीमेंट करते हैं या क्रिएट करते हैं, सबसे पहले हम उसकी क्या करते हैं, डिजाइनिंग करते हैं, मॉडलिंग करते हैं। जैसे आप लोग ने देखा होगा कि सिविल वर्क्स है, जैसे कि वो एक ब्रिज है, तो ब्रिज जब डिजाइन एक्चुअल डिजाइनिंग से पहले क्या करते हैं, उसकी डिजाइनिंग करते हैं। कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइन कैसे होगा, कैसे कनेक्ट होगा, कहाँ उसकी लोड बैलेंसिंग हो, क्या होगा, या इवन रोड है, या इवन जब हम लोग अपना घर जो बनाते हैं उससे पहले हम क्या करते हैं कि उसकी मॉडलिंग करते हैं, डिजाइनिंग करते हैं ऑन पेपर, कैसे कैसे होना चाहिए। ठीक है, तो सेम वे में आप डेटा रिक्वायरमेंट कलेक्ट करने के बाद उसकी डिजाइनिंग करेंगे कि एक्चुअल आपका डेटा किस टाइप से आपको स्टोर करना है, क्या रिलेशनशिप स्टेब्लिश करनी, किस डेटा के क्या अदर डेटा से क्या रिलेशन है, कितना है, क्या कंस्ट्रेंट्स आप अप्लाई करने वाले हैं उस डेटा पे, क्या रूल्स अप्लाई करने वाले हैं, ये सारे जो आप डिजाइन करेंगे वो होगा कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइनिंग ऑफ डेटाबेस। So first आप क्या करेंगे, conceptual designing of your database means before we actually implement this database, first we have to understand it। जब भी हम कोई चीज को कंप्यूटर में फीड करने वाले हैं उससे पहले हम क्या करेंगे, हम खुद समझेंगे उस डेटा की क्या रिलेशन है। ठीक है, ये होता है कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइनिंग। तो एक्चुअल जो ईआर मॉडल है वो है कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइनिंग ऑफ डेटाबेस। ओके, then after this we create the schema means the structure of your database। जब हम कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइन कर लेंगे तो कॉन्सेप्चुअल डिजाइनिंग का जो आउटपुट है वो होगा कॉन्सेप्चुअल स्कीमा। ठीक है, सेम पैरेलली प्रोसेस चल रही है डिजाइन फंक्शनल रिक्वायरमेंट्स और एप्लीकेशन रिक्वायरमेंट्स के लिए। फंक्शनल अपने रिक्वायरमेंट्स कलेक्ट के लिए क्या क्या उसके ऑपरेशंस हैं, देन उसकी एनालिसिस करने के बाद हम करेंगे हाई लेवल ट्रांजेक्शन स्पेक्स। और ये जो भी प्रोसेस है conceptual designing or functional analysis, all these are the DBMS independent process। ठीक है, कोई भी DBMS हो ये all process सेम होगी। ठीक है, after conceptual schema, creation of conceptual schema, then we will translate into a physical design। Physical design means what the actual we will write into our computer, or how we are storing our data into computer। This is called a physical designing of database। Okay, after conceptual designing of database we translate this conceptual designing of database into a physical designing। Okay, how we are storing our data into our computer। Okay, then after storing it's create an internal scheme। Okay, in the same way that we create the application programs and implement it, and this process, physical designing and actual implementation of your program, is DBMS dependent process। Each DBMS has its own way to store the data and write the program or access the data using those program। Means any any DBMS, suppose Oracle has its own way to store the data or retrieve the data, DB2, MySQL, Postgres, all this data has DBMS has its own way to store the data and access those data। So all these processes are DBMS dependent process। Is it clear? आप लोग समझ में आ रहा है? So let's start our conceptual schema, create a conceptual schema। How the conceptual schema is the outcome of the high level conceptual design। Means ultimately the meaning of conceptual schema is to create a design for human understanding or for the understanding of a non-technical users. Okay, it's not a what I want to say. It's not a very complex designing. It's just overall designing of how this data, this entity, how these two entities are related, and what are the constraints we are applying over these two entities. Just a very simple way of designing. Okay, it's a concise description of data requirements of the user. What the data requirements given by the bank, it is just concise description. It includes description of entity type, relationship, and constraints. In your ER model or conceptual design, there is only thing. Only three main things are there. First, entity. You identify your entity types in your requirements. Second, what are the relationship between these entities and what are the constraints over these relationship. Okay. Mainly, there are only three things we will include in conceptual uh, designing of database. First, entities. Second, the relationship between these entities, and third is the constraints over this relationship. Okay. Next, a key point of the conceptual schema is no implementation detail. It's only a design overall overview. Okay, there's no implementation detail, but it's a DBMS independent process. Okay, and the last is ease to understanding and used to communicate with non-technical user. यहाँ जितना भी आप डिजाइन करेंगे वो बहुत ज्यादा टेक्निकल नहीं होगा. ये आपका जो डिजाइनिंग है वो एक इस लेवल पे हो गया, आपके नॉन टेक्निकल यूजर्स से कम्युनिकेट कर पाएंगे कि हम लोगों ने आपका जो जिसका डेटाबेस हम क्रिएट कर रहे हैं वो हम आपके डेटाबेस से ये समझे हैं, इस टाइप से हम ये लेंगे इनके बीच में ये इस टाइप की रिलेशनशिप होगी डेटा में, ये कंस्टेंट्स हैं आपके, ये सब चीज़ हम अप्लाई करेंगे उसमें. ठीक है, हम लोग एक नॉन टेक्निकल यूजर को भी अपना डिजाइनिंग प्रोसेस समझा पाए कि अपने आपके ये समझा है आपसे. एग्जाम्पल है कंपनी डेटाबेस का. हम लोग वी आर क्रिएटिंग अ डेटाबेस फॉर द कंपनी. सो व्हाट वी आर टेकन फ्रॉम द कंपनी. फर्स्ट, company has some departments, company has projects, in company employees work, and there is some dependence between employees. Okay, so these are some key entities of this company database. In company there is a departments. In company it has run several projects and employees working in the company, and what are the dependents and employees. Okay, so you can see this is a simple database for the company. And after in department, you can see after this column there's a written name, department ID, manager. In project, name, project ID, location, employee. In employee, name, PAN, address, salary. So whatever you see before this column, whatever you see before this column, this is an entity. Whatever written before this column is entity. This is one entity type, this is second entity type, third entity type, fourth entity. So you can say this company database, there is a 4 entity types. Okay, department, project, employee, and dependents are the entity type of this company database. And after column, whatever you see is name, department ID, manager. These are the attribute or property of that entity types. So the name is an attribute of departments. Department ID is an attribute of departments. Manager is an attribute of this department entity. Here, as you can see, for the employee has several attributes. Employee has its name, PAN number, address, salary, gender, date of birth, and so on. Okay, so all these are the attributes of entity. Okay, so each entity types has several attributes. Okay, is it clear? So in this company database, we have shown here 4 entity types, and each entity types we have mentioned several attributes. Let's define what is entity and what is attribute. In database, an entity represents an object of real world that has an independent existence. When you create a database, first identify the entity. Entity is nothing but an object of that database which has independent existence. If we talk about in term of the bank, so in bank there is a different entity in compared to university. Suppose you are creating a database for university. So what are the entities in university? Student is an entity, faculty as an entity, books are in entities, departments are some entities. Okay, so these all are the entities, and each entity has its attribute, and each attributes are different from other entity. Like student has own attributes, faculty has its own attributes, department has its own attributes, book, suppose we are talking about the book has its own attributes. Okay, and if we let's define the attribute. Attribute is nothing but a property of that entity. Properties that describe that entity is called attribute. Okay, so talk about student. We take student as an entity. So what are the attribute of a student? Student's name, student's age, student branch, student address, student's email ID, student's father name. These all are the attribute which is describing that student. Is it clear? So let me ask to you, what are the attribute of a department? Unmute your mic and one by one, please speak. We talk about the department in college. What are the attributes of department? Even you can write in chat box. What are the attributes of department?
Number of faculty in a department.
Number of
No, faculty in a department.
okay, and you can write in chat box as well. What are the attribute of department?
Head of department.
Yes, good. ठीक है, डिपार्टमेंट्स जो है उसके आप लोग 15 स्टूडेंट से किसी किसी ने अभी तक कुछ भी नहीं लिखा चैट में। कोई नहीं चाहिए, मैं आपको बता देता हूँ। ठीक है, डिपार्टमेंट है, if we talk about the college department, what are the attribute? First, department name. Yes, some students write something. Yes, Mayank. Department name good, department ID good, department head good. All three are the correct attributes of a department. Department name, department ID, department head, department address, department in department number of labs, in department number of faculties. Okay, what are the facilities provided by the department? You can mention. Okay, and departments overall budget, or what are the what can say, all these are the, you can say, are attribute of a department. Okay, now let's see the different kind of attributes. What kind of attributes or entity can have? Okay, first is simple versus composite attribute. Some attributes has a single well, say no, not single value, it's only simple attributes, like age. I will talk about the employee entity type. So employee has a age which is simple. Only you can mention is a 30-year-old employee. Okay, or 20-year-old employee. Okay, so this is a very simple attribute. Is only one, not single. It's a very simple value. Okay, but we talk about the composite. Composite means it's you can divide you can subdivide your attribute, like name. Its name has you can subdivide your name, like first name, middle name, last name, initial name, title. Means in this attribute we can subdivide. Okay, or you can composite this attribute. Okay, so these kind of attributes called the composite attribute, and simple attributes is only one. Simple, we cannot further subdivide. Age you cannot divide further. Okay, but your address, again, you can address, you can subdivide it. The house number, the street name, the street, the city, pin code, and state and country. The address you can further subdivide. But this date of birth, even you can further subdivide your date of birth, your date of month, year. Okay, so the simple attributes, the attribute which we cannot subdivide. Okay, the second kind of attributes are the single valued versus multi-valued. Attribute can have only at a time single value, or called the single value attribute. At a time, at the moment, you cannot have more than one values. Like in the same way, age, always you always at a particular moment you are only has one number. Means age is one number. Means 30, you are 30-year-old or 25-year-old, 20-year-old. You cannot say I am 20 and 25-year-old. You will be 20 or 25. At a time you will, your age is just a particular number. Okay, but in multi-value attributes, maybe there's some attributes which multiple values are possible, like mobile number. A person can have more than one mobile number. A person can have more than one email ID. Okay, is it clear? A student can study more than one subjects, or he can opt more than one courses. Okay, so several attributes has more than one valued, and some attributes have the only single value possible. So the single valued attributes are the attribute which have only one values possible. and multi-valued attribute, that is the multiple valued are possible. Okay. So, what is the difference between composite attribute and multi-valued attribute? I'm asked, and let me ask to you, what is the difference between composite and multi-valued? Let me ask one by one.
The composite attribute सिंपल बोलिए जो सिंपल एट्रीब्यूट सबसे इनसे मिलकर बनते हैं बल्कि जो सिंपल एट्रीब्यूट्स होते हैं वो इंडिपेंडेंट होते हैं वो किसी पर डिपेंडेंट नहीं रहते वो इंडिपेंडेंट होते हैं जबकि कंपोजिट एट्रीब्यूट्स डिपेंडेंट होंगे जैसे इनमें सिंपल एट्रीब्यूट लिस्ट इनसे मिलकर बने हैं
Good. Mayank, Somani. Mayank. Pooja. Pooja Pandit. What is the difference between composite and multi-valued attribute? Anybody? Bandana? In composite attribute, we can subdivide an attribute like first name, middle name, last name, or you can say title. Okay. Multi-valued are the attribute which have more than one value. Okay. Like I just given the example mobile number. Okay. Suppose what are the color of your dress? Maybe in your dress there is a multiple colors or many colors. Okay, 2 color, 3 color, red, white, green. At a time, maybe in your dress there is no more than one color. Okay, so these all are the multi-valued attribute, and composite attribute are the simple as a single attribute, but it has multiple sub values. Okay. Stored versus derived attributes. Stored attribute are the attribute is complete. The value is complete. Means you stored some value with some values and it's complete. Derived attributes means the attribute which is derived from the some other attributes. Stored attributes. Suppose in your database you have stored the date of birth of student. So based on this date of birth attribute, you can derive the age of student. So date of birth is a stored attribute and age is a derived attribute. Okay. As the same in the same way, if you talk about the company database, in the company database there's an employee table. In employee table, you mentioned the date of joining. You mentioned in your database date of joining of that employee. So based on the date of joining of that employee, you can find the experience of that employee. For how many years the employee is working for your company. Okay, so in the same so this the experience you can deriving from the date of joining. Okay, so date of joining is a stored attribute and experience in here is a derived attribute. Is it clear? The next attribute type of attribute is a null attribute, a null value or null value attribute. In the null values, let me take the example. Suppose in your exam there is an elective subject. सपोज आप 7th सेमेस्टर या 8th सेमेस्टर में इसमें ऐसी स्कीम है कि आपका इलेक्टिव सब्जेक्ट लेने के ऑप्शन है आपका आप एट मैक्सिमम 2 इलेक्टिव सब्जेक्ट आप ऑप्ट कर सकते हैं और एटलीस्ट मतलब वो आपको इलेक्टिव सब्जेक्ट लेना है किसी स्टूडेंट ने 2 इलेक्टिव सब्जेक्ट लिए हैं तो जब भी जब एग्जाम होगा रिजल्ट आएगा तो उससे जो मार्कशीट होगी जो ग्रेड होगा उसमें दोनों सब्जेक्ट्स में उसको ग्रेड मिलेंगे ठीक है जो भी स्कोर उसने किया है ठीक है एक ऐसा स्टूडेंट है जिसने एक ही सब्जेक्ट ऑप्ट किया है एक सेकेंड सब्जेक्ट ऑप्ट नहीं किया है अब एग्जाम हुआ रिजल्ट आया अब उस स्टूडेंट्स की जो मार्कशीट होगी उसमें इलेक्टिव 1 को तो स्कोर होगा उसने ऑप्ट किया उसने एग्जाम दिया उसको जो भी रिजल्ट होगा बट इलेक्टिव 2 सब्जेक्ट उसने ऑप्ट नहीं किया है अब उसमें आप उसको क्या ग्रेड देंगे 0 ग्रेड आप दे नहीं सकते सब्जेक्ट ऑप्ट नहीं किया उसको 0 स्कोर कैसे कर सकते हैं ठीक है आप उसको अननोन भी नहीं लिख सकते वी डू नॉट हैव एनी वैल्यूज फॉर दिस एट्रीब्यूट या मिसिंग भी नहीं है कि आपका वो जो वैल्यूज है वो मिसिंग है आप वहां पर आप लिखेंगे नल वैल्यू कि वो जो एट्रीब्यूट की वैल्यू उस पर्टिकुलर स्टूडेंट्स के लिए एप्लीकेबल नहीं है क्योंकि उसने वो सब्जेक्ट ऑप्ट नहीं किया है ऐसा केस जब वो डेटा की वैल्यू आप पर्टिकुलर रिकॉर्ड के लिए एप्लीकेबल नहीं होती है उस वैल्यूज को बोलते हैं नल वैल्यू ठीक है नल वैल्यू इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम जीरो अननोन मिसिंग okay it's not applicable kind of values okay so null value attributes are the attribute which is not applicable for that record is it clear now entity type and entity set let's define entity type and entity set entity type in your database if you remember the company database there is an entity type departments so in the department there are many departments in the department there are many departments so the department has the same type means all department are sharing the same attribute okay attribute name sorry the department name department address number of employee working head of the department all are the same attributes so we can say this entity has the same type okay so this set of attribute set of entity having the same type is called the entity types so if we talk about our college in our college there are 6 department okay all department has the same type so all these 6 department we combinedly called as an entity type is it clear and entity set are the set of entity from the entity type which having some kind of similarities okay so out of this 6 department there's an 3 department are engineering department so you can say it's an entity set of engineering department is it clear so entity type entity set and entities are different entity is the particular when we talk about the particular department particular entity is called entity so sorry when we talk about the particular department a particular department then it's called the entity like IT department is an entity departments are entity type and out of these departments we pick engineering department 3 engineering department IT EC and mechanical so it's called entity set is it clear entity is a single or a when we talk about the particular entity is called entity if we talk about the department IT department is entity and entity type are the all 6 department are the entity type because all 6 department has the same attributes is share the same properties and entity set is out of this entity type we pick particular some departments based on some similarities. It's called entity set. These are the representation of your entity type and attributes. It's not clear. It's so I think it's not visible. It's a rectangular entity type is represent in a rectangular box, and inside write your entity type name. Okay, and attributes will present in a oval shape in this type, and multi-valued attributes we write oval two times. Oval be written here, and derived attribute we just dotted. Okay, this in this way. The multi-valued we draw two times oval. Okay, an entity is a simple rectangular. Attributes are the oval shape. Again, derived attributes not mentioned here. This in this way we write the derived attributes. Like you can see the age is represented dotted. It's a derived attribute. We're deriving this age from the date of birth date. From the birth date, we're finding the age of this person. Okay, and composite attributes. You can see the name is a composite attribute. The first name and last name is forming this name as a one attribute. And hobbies, as you can see, two times there is an oval, means this person can have more than one hobby. Is it clear? This is a simple representation of your ER models, entity and entity types, and attribute types. Any doubt till this point? Do you have any doubt? Hello? One student read, I'm not audible. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now you are ready.
Okay. So, if you have any doubt, you can ask. If you do not have any doubt, please write the attendance in chat box X in chat box for your attendance. And if you have any doubt, you can ask. Otherwise, you can leave the class. Not P, write X.